And so the quarter has ended. We are at lesson number 13 of this wonderful lesson of love and justice. We're going to be continuing our conversation that we had last week. A lot of us are out on spring break, so you probably won't see us this Sabbath. But we hope that you enjoy this program, whether you're watching us live, Sabbath morning, or whether, like a lot of you, you're watching in the afternoon after church, or you're catching us at some point during the week. We're just delighted that we're part of your spiritual rhythm. Let's go ahead and pray, and then we're gonna talk. God, thank you for loving us the way that you do, just desperately, relentlessly. We pray that we may respond in kind, that we may love you and one another with the same desperation. We pray these things in your name. Amen. So Chris did such a good job last week that we are having him back this week. No, I truly, friends, you all know, and some of you have said that the dynamic is a little different with Chris and I, so than with Joey and I, because sometimes we really tend to get a little too up in the clouds. So, but some of you have said you enjoyed it. For those of you, we are thankful. And for those of you who aren't, I'll try to ground us in the realm of this existence, and then I'll have Chris be brilliant as he typically is. How are you, friend?
Doing well. Yep, happy. Yep.
Happy.
Yeah.
Happy's good.
Yeah,
We'll take
yeah,
happy.
It is. Yeah.
We'll take happy.
Yep.
So I hear you're going to Australia.
Yes. No, I'm really fortunate to. I was in Australia a couple of weeks ago, hanging out with the Victorian and Tasmanian Pathfinders, doing their Pathfinder Camporee, which was a lot of fun. And then back here for 2 weekends, but then heading back to Australia for holidays and also for a wedding. So
wow.
Yeah. Yep. So
wow. So one was work, and then this one is actual vacation, which you need to take. You need to take those vacations, Chris Stanley.
Listen, no, it's when you're in something and you're kind of working hard, you're doing what you need to do and you keep doing it. But then you take a break and then you realize how much you needed the break, and you just you suddenly feel a lot more relaxed, and just that, it's not in a bad way, but just the residual energy that is required to keep, working hard and fast. And anyway, so breaks are good. Breaks are really good.
It takes a while. It takes a while to kind of come down from the level of anxiety and production that you feel you need to be operating at. And then, about 3-4 days, at least with me, with Linda and I, it's about 3 or 4 days until we kind of are like, oh, wait, we don't. Oh, this is nice. Usually by then it's almost always half of the vacation, and so we're kind of starting to, and then 2 days before we come back, we start kind of revving up and ramping up. But Chris, you know this. If you don't, it gets to a point, and I know for me, it's been there for a while, and this is not a badge of honor. This is something that I am deeply, deeply embarrassed about. I am not accruing any more time off. So I need to find some time to take a vacation, because now it's just, I don't know where it goes. It doesn't carry over. You max out, and then it's done.
And you don't get paid for the extra hours that you do.
No, you don't. You don't.
No, I'm in the exact same position.
Yes.
So
yes.
It's just going. I guess I'm working for free.
It's in limbo somewhere. Right. Although we're not Catholics, our PTO is in limbo somewhere. And so I'm really glad. That you're
thank you.
that you're taking some time. I know, especially for you, as next month we start gearing up for the Easter season, which is really taxing on your department, as you all do a lot of the logistical work behind the scenes. So a break is not only well deserved, but deeply, deeply needed.
Honestly, just looking forward to it. And the other thing that happens, you go on break, and inevitably, 3 or 4 days in, you just start sleeping a lot. Like a lot. Like every time I go on break, like 3 or 4 days, I'm like, oh, should I see a doctor? Like I'm sleeping a lot. But it's just rest, and it's just what you need.
It's what your body, body needs.
you go on holidays and you're like, crikey, maybe I should go see the doctor. Maybe I'm sleeping too much. Maybe this is cancer or something like that. But then every time it's like, no, actually, I just needed just proper rest.
Exhaustion. It's just,
Yep.
it's incredible how that works out. And I know we're Adventists and we're supposed to live this really balanced life and just minister out of from the outflow of kind of this life of balance. But you're absolutely right. It'll be sometimes. It's really funny how it is for me. So I'll get into these rhythms where I'm just grinding, and so I'll be here till 9, and then 9 in the evening, and get home, and then try to decompress. And so by then it'll be 11:30, 12, and then 5 a.m. the next day, doing it all over again. And then the weekend will come, especially those Sundays when we don't have funerals or anything.
You
and
crash.
I'll sleep 16 hours.
Yeah. You go down hard.
I will sleep 16 hours. And
Yep.
and the really, really insane thing is I don't feel tired. Like if you ask me right now, are you? I feel
I'm okay.
great.
Yep,
I'm
I'm good.
great.
I'm good.
I'm energized.
Yep.
I love what I do. Love
Yep.
the colleagues.
Yep.
And then there'll be a lull, and I'll sleep 16 hours, which is great because then you feel kind of restored. But it does speak about kind of the lives we live here in the West, where productivity has this value that trumps every other value.
Yeah. Listen, absolutely. And those Sundays where you have a big sleep, and you wake up, and you have some food, and you're like, oh, I can sleep again. And you're like, I'll just lie down for a moment, and then 4 hours, and then you wake up and you're like, I'm hungry again, and you get food. Oh, I'm tired again.
And you go back to sleep. This is brilliant. I did this. When was it? Actually, it wasn't even on the weekend. I think it was last Tuesday. So Tuesday. For those of you who don't know, we have our staff meeting, and Tuesday is it's a busy day in a way that is a little different. I get a lot of energy from interacting with people that we minister to. But Tuesday, it's a lot of meetings and logistical things that have to get done. And so typically from about 9 in the morning, 8:30 in the morning till about 3:30 in the morning, it's just a block solid meeting after meeting after meeting. So this past Tuesday, I went home early. I went home at 6. Got home. There was a basketball game on TV, and lay down to watch the game. And I was woken up by Linda like at 10 o'clock at night. So 4 hours later, saying, "Hey, are you okay?" And I just mumbled something, and then I don't know what happened until 6:30 the next morning. So I slept for like 13 hours, and it was marvelous. But again, I think it speaks to this reality where sometimes margin in our life, and this is us just being candid, sometimes margin is something that we speak a lot about but it's something that is very difficult to truly achieve in life.
And you have all these other kind of, you could probably call them rightfully symptoms that pop up, like your brain's not working as well, and like you find aspects of your personality, or like you're not feeling quite as strong, all that sort of stuff, and you start trying to think about where it comes from, and then you just have a good rest, and you're like, oh, that was it.
That's all I needed.
I just needed a good rest.
That's all I needed.
So this is your public safety announcement.
So rest. If you're at home and you didn't come to church today, and you're in bed. Don't feel guilty. We are actually really envious because that's what your body needed. So, Chris, the lesson finishes after your public service announcement. The lesson concludes kind of with this idea that we started hinting of, and that's why I thought it'd be great to bring you back and continue the conversation from last week. Last week we started talking about these concepts of love and justice and how they might not be as disparate as one might think. And this week it's almost as if the author of the lesson had the same idea in mind, because the primary premise that the lesson makes this week is that love is the true application of the law, so that the purpose of the law is love. And we say that a lot. I don't think we consider the implications of what that means, particularly as we kind of sometimes weaponize the law for our own needs.
Well, yes, and the shocking reality of that statement means that, like, in the US, the purpose of our forms of democratic governance is that we are actually the ones who are helping create law. And so as we do that, as we participate in this creation of, laws that go past, the House and the Senate, and then are put into place by the judiciary, that's an act of love, which is a fascinating idea. That if done correctly, the laws that we are speaking about that govern us as a nation, they should be acts of love.
Wow, that is powerful in two ways. It's powerful in the sense that you never see love as an act of love. You typically understand love as restrictive. And I think what I would like to ponder with you today is that sometimes restriction is love. In other words, I love the capacity to rest. So I am going to put, in your case, a restriction on the amount of days that I'm going to work straight without a holiday, right? So sometimes to be restrictive is to be loving. I think the other thing is restriction can only, the only way this can make sense, and as you were talking, I was thinking about this, is that if the restriction isn't arrived at as part of a communal enterprise, it's kind of this collective conversation that we have arrived on at, then the restriction is always going to be seen or felt as oppression. And when it is seen and felt as oppression, it cannot be understood as love. And so I think the second part that you said that was really, really powerful to me was that when done properly, to create laws that go from the legislative power to the judiciary to the executive and then get implemented, that has to be a collective. It has to be the work of a collective. So it goes to the legislative power because at that level, right, Congress is kind of the base representation of we as a people. And so it goes from there, from the people that are having conversations. And obviously, it's tenuous to talk about this in this deeply politicized world, but in theory, the way it's supposed to work,
what it's meant to do,
is Congress women and congressmen are intended to be a close representation of these districts, where they are closely connected to the conversations that we are having within that district. And that's why the process of creating laws starts there, because even within our democratic system, it's understood that process, in order for it not to feel oppressive, needs to be arrived at as a result of this communal work that we do, which is collective.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. You see an interesting parallel in this, in Moses' experience, where he is, before he receives the Ten Commandments, is acting as a judge. So he is experiencing firsthand the people coming to him with their cases, with their disputes, and he's experiencing that. And so you've got this idea where it's being built, this legal system, this framework of what is essentially acts of love from his experience of the people. But then he has this moment where he goes up the mountain and receives this revelation of law as well, which ultimately should correspond, with each other. But that process where Moses first hears the disputes and acts as a judge and, recognizes law, which is essentially, love in action, in amongst the voices of the people. We are taking that approach as well in this country, as you're saying, that if enough of us participate in those conversations,
that's a big if,
and if other systems of power and people don't dominate that conversation, those procedures fundamentally should create a system that creates love. Which, that's a weird idea, isn't it?
That is extremely nuanced, and it has to be unpacked, because often, so I love the fact that you bring Moses up as an example, because what Moses is trying to create is the antithesis to Egypt, right?
Yes, yeah.
Israel comes out of their experience in Egypt, and they are bound to building brick and mortar for Pharaoh, and now they're going to be bound to Yahweh to build this kind of new society. In Egypt, it's about the production, the ceaseless need to produce, and in Yahweh, it's about a land of that produces milk and honey for you in order for you to inhabit. And that's, I think, why the concept of the Sabbath is so central, because the Sabbath is the ultimate antithesis to the world that Egypt has built. So what I find fascinating is that often the laws, if you look at the laws, at how those are written and prescribed within the Decalogue, particularly the laws that govern our relationship to each other, they probably aren't that much different from any other legal code that you have in the ancient Near East. In the sense of, okay, you know what? Don't murder people.
Generally.
Don't commit adultery. Respect somebody else's possessions. Don't lie in a court of law. All of these things kind of are part and parcel of any system of governance in the ancient Near East, even in Egypt. I think what drives the Mosaic system apart is that the Mosaic system is actually asking for participation from the people. In other words, Exodus 19, God says, "This is my covenant," and the people will respond, "Everything that the Lord commands, we shall do." And so it's this much more participatory dialogue that then ends up being what we call the Decalogue.
What is written below in experience is written above as well in God's law, and those two, when done correctly, should correspond.
And I think because it's participatory in nature, what drives this is going to be different. And I think that's where we, a lot of times in interpreting or in utilizing the law, have made the mistake. So we, for example, look at the issue of adultery, or the issue of covetousness, or the issue of stealing, and we look at it as something that is a question of morality, which I think it is. But I think rather than define these actions as inherently immoral or amoral, I would be much more interested in a conversation on law that says, okay, these issues, and how do they break down the trust and the connection of a society that is needed in order to be a loving, caring, nurturing society? In what ways is this eroding our love capital? And if you look at the Decalogue in that way, it perfectly makes sense why kind of these prescriptions are laid out, because the reason for them is that they're trying to nurture rather than erode Israel's love capital.
Absolutely. Because ultimately, like for simpler, modern examples, there are activities that do erode love and trust in a society. So, outside of school zone, driving past a school where kids are walking out, at 70 miles per hour, we collectively, we've come to the decision that activity is not good for all of us.
Right.
For any of us, because it creates danger, it creates, situations where there will be loss, and so that's not tenable for all of us to do. So we have decided that in the protection of love, we have created this law that collectively we're all like, yeah, we need to do that.
I think that idea, because again, we're going to use this Johannine understanding of sin. Sin is the transgression of the law. And I think when we, by the way, I agree with John's description of it. I sometimes wonder if John had in mind what a lot of us have in mind when we see the law. So, for example, we'll say, okay, this is immoral. This act is immoral, and so it is against the law, and so you shouldn't do it. But the act, I find that more often than not, actions in themselves are amoral. Driving 70 miles is an amoral action. What makes it lawful or unlawful is how it functions within this broader conversation of how do we love and we care for one another.
Yes.
And I think in the same way, if you look at the Decalogue, a lot of these acts are amoral. What has to be asked is, how do these fit within the broader conversation of how we function as a loving society? In other words, sex by itself is amoral.
Yes.
Sex with somebody else's partner that is in a committed relationship is unlawful and immoral, not on the basis of the act itself, but because it starts eroding the trust that is needed to build a loving, harmonious society.
Yes, yeah, precisely. And you begin to understand, what is immoral precisely when, as you've said before, when you begin asking the questions of everyone who is associated with these things. When you ask the questions of the betrayed spouse, well, how did that make you feel?
Right.
You begin to see the implications of these actions, and making sure that all of the voices of the affected are included. You begin to develop, this legal system that, done again correctly with participation, should reflect love.
So when we say that love is the application of the law, what we really mean is that the law itself, or laws themselves, cannot be enacted or pursued without the task of conversing and constantly conversing with people who are affected by the laws themselves. And I know that sounds a little complex, but if you think about it, that's how really we pursue law in this country. So the question of law is always about what's the legal precedence to this particular issue. So you go and you go back and you study case law and you look at kind of the legal precedence. And in a sense, that is the conversation between this situation and previous situation, and how that particular law impacted people living in real situations and real circumstances. And so rather than saying this is the law, what we actually ask is, okay, how are these laws interplaying with the life experiences of real people that are having to make sense of life in the midst of these circumstances? That then makes the law an act of love, because the law, to build the law, to apply the law, requires listening and conversation.
Absolutely. Before a peer, a jury of your peers, before your community is, how it should work. Does it always work that way? No.
Typically it doesn't, because it gets murky, and it gets murky not just within government, it gets murky within churches.
Yes.
It gets murky within spirituality. It gets murky because the level of patience and care and conversation that is needed is one that in our microwave society sometimes we don't have time for, and so we just want people to give us the answer. Well, tell me what to do. I mean, how often do you get that question as that request as a pastor? I just want you to tell me what to do. And you say, well, I can't do that. I can't tell you what to do. I can explore and I can converse and I can I can immerse you in a community that'll thoughtfully reflect with you upon these things, but I can't just tell you what to do.
Yeah, yeah, and that's exactly it. It takes a shocking amount of time and energy and intentionality in listening to, yeah, as you've said, to come to these positions where we recognize the ramifications, the implications of our actions, and find out the better ones as opposed to the worse ones. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and you only can do that by having your boots on the ground, which is
Yes.
why I love what Matthew does with Jesus throughout the Gospels. So Matthew presents Jesus as kind of this paragon of Israel's prophetic tradition. So time and time again, you'll hear Jesus speak, and when he opens his mouth, he sounds much less like a rabbi and much more like a prophet, in the sense that Jesus is attacking these structures, both legal and religious, that have become ends in themselves, and is pushing people to be reflective in the task of conversation. So Jesus will tell them, hey, you tithe the cumin and all the spices, but that's not what I want. And in that sense, he sounds a lot in Matthew 22 and 23. He sounds a lot like the prophets of old, who are saying, yeah, you have your feasts and your sacrifices, but you sell the poor for a pair of sandals. And so until you fix that, please go away with your feasts and your sacrifices.
Yeah. You neglect the weightier matters of the law.
That's literally Jesus' words.
Yes. You know, you pick off the easy stuff to do.
Right.
You know, you pick off the stuff that, yeah, like tithing cumin's pretty easy. like that's not hard. The weightier matters of the law, precisely trying to work out why your society is selling the poor for a pair of shoes. You know, that's hard. That is hard.
The problem, Chris, is that would be the critique that could be leveled of Christendom today.
Oh yeah. Yes.
Because that could be that same critique could be leveled at our societies today, because we do the easy things, but the hard things, the ones that actually require us engaging in thoughtful conversation with people with whom we might disagree vehemently on things, that's what Jesus considers the weightier issues of the law. And I think for me, just reading that in our particular context was really, really sobering this week.
Which context are you thinking of?
Well, I mean, we talked a little bit in staff meeting about how, at least in America today, the language and the ideology of what it means to be a Christian is becoming very much entrenched with a particular way of thinking that doesn't promote dialogue or discourse, that is self-congratulatory and triumphalistic. And when Christianity becomes self-congratulatory, triumphalistic, and ritualistic, Christianity has time and time again fallen short of its ideals. And one of our colleagues said, I am deeply distressed about that. And I think that's without wandering into the realm of actual policy and politics. I think that shift is something that is not a new thing, by the way. It's something that has been happening in America for a long time. It's just now we're becoming maybe more aware of it.
And those are the easy things to do in Christianity. like the triumphalism. Like that's easy. Like it's fun to do.
It is.
It's enjoyable. It's not hard to do.
I love it. I love it. I love saying how we're the best and how Jesus is king.
Yeah, it's not hard.
And how everybody else isn't the best.
Yeah.
And how America is a shining city on a hill, chosen by God to fulfill a particular destiny. And how we love freedom. And you know the discourse already better than I do. I love saying that.
That wasn't hard for you to
stuff.
say, was it?
No, I loved it. I actually felt great inside.
It just flows, doesn't it?
It does. It does. And you I mean, Chris is powerful. I mean, you walk into a service where the ethos of America and this great tradition of this country that I absolutely adore intermingles with the story of Scripture. By the way, this isn't new. This was being done in 1600 when America was was trying to find a religious rationale to exterminate the native inhabitants of the land. I mean, Cotton Mather famously preached a sermon to called Counsels to Soldiers. Look it up, where he is saying, we are the people of Israel coming into this land with the God-given command to exterminate the alien, the Amalekite living in these lands. It's easy to say, I love it, but it's precisely because it's easy to say that I tremble, because it comes easy to me.
Yes, yeah. That it should be its own warning in its self-congratulatory kind of, positioning. But it's not the hard thing to do. It's not the weightier matter of the law. That line there, you've sold the poor for a pair of shoes. A terrifying line. When we all have enough to live on, we can have some very fantastic and interesting conversations about who should have more or who should have less. But whilst people continue to live in abject poverty, it's a little bit hard to see the price of some shoes that we buy. Because no one deserves to live in abject poverty.
Yeah.
And so that conversation is a lot harder than the Christian triumphalism and the, oh my goodness. Yeah.
No, and it's a tough pill to swallow, because I'm a part of it.
Oh no, I like shoes.
Right, I'm a part of it. And Chris, as you're talking, I shudder. So this earlier today, I was coming to church, and was at my intersection to get on the freeway, and there was a man who was walking across the intersection of the freeway, and you could tell he had some challenges, some mental health challenges. He was pushing a stroller with a couple things on there, which for him is probably all of his earthly goods. For me, it's trash. And he was walking. Again, you could tell that there were some mental health issues. Just this really dirty jacket and a ill-fitting shirt, and these pants that were falling off, and shoes that were at least 3 sizes too big. And I looked at him, and in this moment came over me. Again, it's not something I'm proud of, where I said, I wonder if this is what Paul had in mind when he says that we will all be transformed in the twinkling of an eye. Right? And then I said, God, I can't wait for the day when you transform. When you finally step in and transform this. And then I patted myself in the back. And I said, what a great pastor you are. Isn't that a righteous prayer?
Absolutely.
You looked at this man in abject need. And you said, oh man, what a day it is going to be when God heals him and restores him. And friends, it is going to be a wonderful day.
It will be. And it's a good thought.
It's a great thought, but I feel there's a but coming.
It's an easy thought.
But it's an easy thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
isn't it? It's a much harder thought to actually get down from my car and engage in a conversation. And if I'm hearing you right, that's the weightier measure of the law. Those are the weightier things of the law.
Yes, yeah. And that's what the passage is referenced in our study. James chapter 2 speaks to specifically. It touches on these very issues. You have many questions that you need to ask of the entire system that allows such abject poverty. You have many questions to create law, which should be an act of love that leaves somebody in that position. You have many conversations, and then you have many actions that you need to follow up with. Yeah.
Ooh,
Yes.
that is even more complex.
Yeah,
and
it is.
and even harder because and I agree. So I completely agree that even me getting off the car and having a conversation and maybe saying, hey, can I buy you breakfast? Okay, we eat, I hear his story, I'm moved, I offer to pray with him. And I've made a new friend, so every time I see him, I'll wave, and maybe sometimes we'll connect. But that's easy.
Even that, yeah.
That's even that, which, by the way, is 100 times better than what I did this morning. Even that's easy, because it seems like we're not just asked to go and listen lovingly to the experiences of people, but we're actually called to ask questions of the systems and structures that create laws that are not the materialization of love, that create laws that allow someone like that to be walking in the street in the wealthiest country in the world, in the wealthiest time in human history. But I like my shoes.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't make me feel very good today. But it's the gospel. I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think this is what Jesus is talking about. This is what James is talking about.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yep. And if we were truly participatory in our construction of our laws with everyone's voices, we would probably do a better job at alleviating these circumstances. We would. And I think, yeah.
Yeah, so back to the question, because you're probably there watching from home, frustrated, saying, wait, I want to do what? I'm called to do what? I think the temptation is to always align a particular call, particularly the call to justice and love, to a loving justice that Scripture extends to us, and then to align that with a political ideology. And I think that is a losing proposition. It's a proposition that will get us nowhere.
Yeah.
Because I think it's really not about the political ideology. It's about the gospel principle that is driving you to form partnerships with people sometimes with whom you vehemently will disagree. And shocker of shockers, Adventism was really good at doing this early in its tradition, right? So we were, hey, on the issue of temperance, we'll be here with the Women's Temperance League. On the issue of slavery, we'll be here with the abolitionists.
Yep.
On the issue of separation of church and state, we'll align with the Federalists. You had kind of Adventism forming these limited partnerships with a bunch of groups with different political predilections, because we were not driven or beholden to any political ideology. There seemed to be certain principles that drove early Adventism to a place where we said, on this issue, we will seek collaboration in crafting laws that we understand are loving with people with whom we might disagree on a myriad of other issues.
Absolutely. And we weren't scared of that either. We were a community who had the space for those conversations. We were the community that chose to, as Jesus did, come towards this table of conversation from so many different directions, bringing so many different experiences to it, but also making that decision to have fellowship and hospitality with each other and charity as we had those conversations.
Yeah. So it's not really about political correctness or social or cultural expediency. It's our foundation is something that is deeper, that goes beyond the fads of what is popular or the causes that are preeminent in this time and in this place. But when the cause is valid and valuable, when people are saying, hey, women, for example, in this culture are oftentimes objected to incredible harassment. The church says, we see you, we recognize that, and we're looking to change that, not because of Me Too, but because that's Jesus 2,000 years ago. So it's not something we're waiting to do now. It's something that is drilled into us, because that's kind of, it goes beyond political expediency, and it goes beyond popularity. It's something that is much more lasting than that.
Yes, yeah. It might find moments where it has historical resonance with other groups, but it's not driven by that. It has its own tune that it plays to.
Correct.
Yeah.
And in that sense, it cannot be co-opted. This is where it is so important that y'all need to understand this difference, friends.
Yes. Yeah.
If it is not founded in that thing we are calling, it can be co-opted by the powers by the principalities and the powers. It can be co-opted by Rome. Because religion and faith are really powerful tools.
Listen. Yes.
And Rome will co-opt religious language when it serves Rome's purposes. And the political powers that be will co-opt religious language when it serves that purpose. And so it needs to be grounded in something deeper. It needs to, I love the way you said, it needs to play to its very own tune. Otherwise, it runs the risk of being co-opted.
Yeah, listen, No, I mean, you've said it precisely. Because faith and belief are such powerful motivators in society, there will be people who will come along and they will pretend to sing the songs of faith for the influence that it gives. And it may even deceive the very elect. You know, it might sound correct in some ways, but the tune that you must play off is the teachings of Christ. And so if you begin to hear dissonance between the teachings of Christ and the powers to be co-opting religious language, you must return to the teachings of Christ in that moment. You need to.
That's a hard truth, and it is why people that encountered Jesus were constantly enamored by the message, but repelled by its implications. The message sounds really good. Let's love everybody. The implications of said message. Let's create a law that is applied in love, because love is a true application of the law. That message is incredibly appealing. But the implications of that message are truly frightening.
Mm.
I think, for example, of the work of now somebody that I'm reading very carefully. It's Paul Farmer, Duke trained physician, left to practice in Haiti, makes the argument. I think it's a well constructed argument. Deeply committed Catholic Christian who makes the argument that healthcare needs to show a preference for the poor, because disease is just brilliant the way he articulates it. He says disease shows a preferential option for the poor.
Yeah.
And so for Farmer, one of the problems with kind of being co-opted, language that is powerful and religious and meaningful and true, being co-opted by the structures and the systems of this time. By the way, lest you think Farmer wrote long ago. This isn't and he's been working for decades. So he's worked through both Democrats and Republican-led White House. And he's equally critical of both. Just felt I needed to put that out there. What he says that I think is so powerful is, throughout the latter half of the 20th century, this really powerful and true language of the separation of church and state was used as a tool, was co-opted as a tool to defund and diminish the state's responsibility to the poor. And so he, for example, says that when the conversation shifted from the state's responsibility, remember we started with the premise that when it functions as it should, the laws that we create are created as the result of a communal conversation. Farmer says the moment that you shift that from the state's responsibility to charity, you've actually severely curtailed the participation process of who engages in said conversation.
You have.
And he says that is a tragedy. And so again, this is not because it is politically expedient, or it is an ideology that is driven by a affiliation to any party. It is him saying, and him noting, in the tradition of both the New Testament and the Old Testament, that the critique and the call for Christians isn't only to go and engage the man that at bare minimum, it's get out of your car and have a conversation with him, Mendez. But actually, the call is to go a step further and ask the questions of the systems and the structures that have created laws that have made this a reality. And then the invitation is for me to participate in a conversation that will lead to the creation of better laws. And I think that's hard. That's hard to do. Because again, I have my biases, Chris. I like my shoes. I like my lattes. I like my comfort. And the systemic problems in this country seem to be so deeply entrenched and so old that what is my little voice going to do to change any of the things that are happening at that macro level?
Yeah, because it's a question of where you collect the information, isn't it? So if charity is not the responsibility of the entire nation.
Correct.
You are making the church the one who has to collect the information, but then the information that flows to the church as well, it becomes difficult because charity then becomes based on attention and immediate need. You aren't creating a system that collects all of the information and maintains a focus on it. If you have the right marketing and the right labels and the right attention grabbing, materials, you can direct attention momentarily towards a charitable cause. And that can be good, because that can be a market feedback system where some people go, well, I want to give to that, not to that. But it does have its limitations in the fact that, there might be some things that are really attractive and exciting to work on and to give to, but there might be some things that are really needed that are simply neglected because attention just doesn't quite get there. And so you've siloed information, you've partitioned it off, you've quieted voices of it. Whereas opposed to if you can collect the information in, as you're saying, by broader participation in the works of the entire country, we will be simply functioning with better information to make better decisions if we can,
Oof.
Yes.
And which is why, again, we're going to come back, I think, to this notion time and time again today. The church cannot be co-opted, or ought never to be co-opted by the state, and the church isn't supposed. And mind you, I love Luther. Love Luther. Disagree with him vehemently on this idea of the two kingdoms. Love him deeply, and deeply, deeply indebted to Luther. But I don't think the church ought ever to be co-opted by the state, which Luther agrees with me on. I also don't think the church should construct its own separate organization alongside that of the state, this other kingdom, as Luther would have it. I think the church has always functioned best when it is this constant thorn in the side of the state. When the church functions as the conscience to principalities and powers, constantly turning the hearts of many back to the gospel. I think that's when the church becomes prophetic. When the church creates its own para-organization alongside or competing with the state, I think we've seen often that has led the church to sectarianism, exclusivism, and I think it's much better when the church says, let's ask questions of the powers and the systems that we have helped create, and let's ensure that we're being critical of them.
That's right. And it's again, you've said it well. Sometimes too often we disengage.
Yeah.
And we make these arguments of disengagement. We fall to that error. And then the other error is we fall to the error of saying, well, listen, we must co-opt and use this thing for us. Whereas functioning as a prophetic voice is thoroughly engaged, but it's not seeking the power of the state.
Right.
It's functioning in a unique role, but an important role.
Yeah, we don't want a Christian theocracy in America.
No, but we're not calling Christians not to participate in.
But
that's it.
Preach it.
Yes.
That's the prophetic power of the gospel.
Deeply engaged.
Deeply, deeply engaged.
Yes.
But always resisting power.
Yes.
And can you believe it, Chris Stanley?
Yeah.
That's what Jesus did. Right? They come to him and they're saying, let's make you king. And he's like, nah, not going to do that. I'm not interested in that. Yep. Not interested in leading an armed revolt through the gates of Rome today.
Because he walks in on the donkey. Here we come. Here comes our savior, and they expect him to overthrow Rome, and yet he goes and he clears the temple because the temple has become co-opted by Rome. That's the way the story narrative goes. They're like king, and he's like,
first let's clean house.
That's right, because they're all like, you're going to clear out Rome, but he's like, actually, the problem here is this religious institution has become co-opted by political powers, so I need to clear that out. It should be a place of prayer for all nations. My Father's house shall be. Clears the money and yes, yeah.
So the application of love is to participate in both spiritual and religious and theological laws, but also social laws and judicial systems and processes that will constantly seek to question but never be co-opted.
Yeah.
Well, that's a challenge. That's a challenge. But it's one I think that I'll be thinking about next time I run into my friend. And at bare minimum, next time, I'll do more than pray.
It's always challenging, isn't it?
It is. It truly is. It truly is.
It's, again, as we said, like, there are easy things to do in Christianity. But when you take it seriously, there are some weighty, heavy, terrifying things that we have yet to do.
But that's why it's prophetic. That's why this faith is a prophetic faith. This is why Adventism is prophetic.
Yes,
Because we as a denomination never used to run away from the tough things. Never. We always have this history that I am so proud of taking upon ourselves the desire to champion positions that were at the time deeply unpopular because we thought it was right, because that's what it meant to be prophetic. That's what the gospel demanded from us.
That's what love required. Yeah.
Ooh, that's a perfect way to end. Chris, will you pray for us?
Pleasure. To the God who is terrifying and strange and wonderful and good and guides us. Just give us the courage to follow you and give us the wisdom to know where you're going. Bless us and teach us how to bless others. Amen.
May this week lead you to live courageously and to love recklessly. We'll see you next week.